Thank you, Chair. Mr. Obed, it's good to see you. Thank you for coming. I don't think we've ever met, but I think I probably seen you on a few flights now. Now that I think of it, because I imagine you fly through Edmonton. You have told the Globe and Mail that the current standards for the Indigenous Business Directory are far too inclusive. And this is a quote I found interesting. "We are now living in an era where there are tremendous opportunities to be had for qualifying as First Nations, Inuit, and Métis business. There are many actors in this country who would want to take advantage of that." What I understand you to be saying is that if you have a self-identification model, you're going to have unscrupulous people who are going to self-identify in whatever way it is they determine to be in their interest to self-identify. And that's why it's so important that we don't just have a sort of self-identification model for programs. I wonder if you want to comment on that, maybe just share your thoughts on this kind of self-identification model that we've been seeing a lot of in a lot of different places.
Well, there are many sides to this, and I would say for jurisdictions like municipalities, provinces, territories, and the federal government who have had ambition for a certain percentage of procurement that is Indigenous procurement, there's an incentive to meet that target. From those who wish to fraudulently take advantage of this particular space, there is an opportunity to find a way to be an Indigenous business to then take advantage of that material advantage, as Angela has described, to ensure that First Nations, Inuit, and Métis who have secured Section 35 status, have created constructive arrangements, whether they be modern treaties or other arrangements with the Government of Canada, that often have economic development considerations within them, that they are now competing with another class of I would say bad actors within this space that governments have been unwilling to hold to account. We need to go back into the relationship between, say, for our case, for Inuit. We've gone through the 40 to 50 years of treaty making with the Government of Canada. We have worked with you to compromise and create structures that we now are demanding the Government of Canada to abide by. We didn't ever anticipate that, say, our Inuit businesses would be then in competition with newly formed Indigenous collectives who don't have Section 35 status, who just assert that they are an Indigenous collective and then all of a sudden are eligible to bid on opportunities alongside the structures that we've created.
Now, I think you made an important point there, that there is a perverse incentive on the part of businesses to pretend to be Indigenous to take advantage of these opportunities, but there's also perverse incentive on the side of the government, other entities that are trying to say we've met a target, that by having an overly permissive standard that in reality includes non-Indigenous businesses in the category of Indigenous, they can trumpet having met some kind of a target, which they in reality haven't met. And I think we do see a lot of that from this government, a desire to show success, which is beyond that merited by the evidence. I want to ask you about enforcement as well, because there's an issue of what the review standard is and who qualifies, but there's also an issue of enforcement. We found this on subcontracting, for example, that there are clear rules on if you're benefiting from that Indigenous procurement opportunity, that you can't subcontract exclusively to non-Indigenous businesses. There have to be a third of your subcontracts have to be Indigenous businesses as well. Yet there's no tracking of subcontracting. There seems to be a complete lack of enforcement around that subcontract rule, which allows a bait and switch as well. It allows a promise that there's going to be subcontracts to certain companies and then not there. So did you have reflections on the enforcement around some of these rules and the extent to which that's part of the problem?
Yes, and it also touches on the position of Inuit Tapirikinatimi that the enforcement should not be given to a third party external to government. The federal government has the tools to enforce. Third parties often do not. They don't have the legislative base, they don't have the resources, and often they don't have the general terms and conditions from government to do that particular work. So if we want to be real about ensuring that Indigenous peoples benefit from these Indigenous incentives, or the entire structure, like why this exists at all, is based on inequity. It's based on the rights of Indigenous peoples to participate. And we need enforcement. We need recourse and remedy for those who wish to take advantage of these systems or do not qualify for them. So what we've pushed for at ITK is a very clear definition of who Inuit are. We've created an Inuit Nunangat policy. We're hoping that, and it was adopted by the Government of Canada in April 2022. Within it, it clearly defines who Inuit in Canada are. We've already done that through our treaties as well, but we continue to work with government to try to have every corner of the federal system understand who Inuit are and who is in and who is outside of that catchment. Unfortunately, in the research community and also in the procurement community, the guidelines about who is eligible often are far too inclusive and are at odds with the Inuit Nunangat policy.
I'll get IT to contact you and we'll slot you back in for your 6 minutes if we can get you working. Why don't you go ahead for 5 minutes, Mr. Genuis, and then Ms. Berlerise will follow up with you.
Thank you, Chair. Back to our witnesses. We were talking when I finished my last round about the real complete lack of enforcement, and I think it's pretty stark in terms of the issue of enforcement. You have over 1,000 companies that have been removed from the Indigenous Business Directory. Now, there are various reasons why it could be a change of ownership, but over 1,000 companies have been removed from the Indigenous Business Directory, including notable cases like Dalian Enterprises that was involved in the Arrive scam scandal, and Canadian Healthcare Agency that was part of a very suspicious joint venture. So you have all these companies being removed from the Indigenous Business Directory, and yet not a single company has ever faced consequences for Indigenous identity fraud. Now, our position would be that Indigenous identity fraud is fraud, and if you're trying to gain a financial advantage through Indigenous identity fraud, then that should be treated with all of the seriousness that any other case of fraud would be treated with. Actually, frankly, none of this is being treated very seriously by the government, but in any event, all fraud should be treated seriously, and that should include Indigenous identity fraud. Do you have a response to the fact that not a single case of consequences for Indigenous identity fraud has been identified?
It's unacceptable. We are hoping that in the future, this country will create legislation or will create enforcement mechanisms for existing legislation to treat this issue for what it is, fraudulent activity. We do have growing case law. Just this year, an individual has been sentenced to federal prison, a 3-year sentence for her role in defrauding Nunavut Tungavik. It's too bad that Nunavut Tungavik is not able to speak about this today. We also know that in the United States, there have been cases where individuals or groups, collectives, who have fraudulently identified as Indigenous peoples have been sentenced and served time in jail. Fraud is fraud. And some of this meets the threshold of millions of dollars, and it should be treated with the same consequence that any sort of other fraud within the business community is dealt with. So we look forward to strengthening the enforcement mechanisms in relation to this scenario, which is frankly growing, and if it is not checked, it will become an existential crisis within this country for the delineation between who's Indigenous and who is not, and another form of colonization where those who are not Indigenous are taking material advantage from Indigenous peoples.
Thank you. Those are very strong words. Existential crisis, new form of colonialism, and thank you for sharing your reflections on that. The time is running short, but do any of the other witnesses want to comment on the same point? No need to if you agree completely. So okay. What percentage of federal government contracts do you see as presently going to properly identifiable Inuit businesses?
Thanks for that question. This also leads us into another point, is that we currently do not have the data to be able to understand from a distinctions-based what the Inuit percentage of Indigenous procurement is. And we have worked through the Inuit Crown Partnership Committee to ask for this data. We don't have it yet, but it would help us immensely because we're all trying to reach a threshold, and we would love
you don't have it. Do they not have it, or are they just not giving it to you?
I don't know.
Okay, well, let's make this simple. Does the committee agree to order the production of this information? Okay, great. We can help you get access to it through the committee then. One concern that I have is when I look at some of the numbers for Indigenous businesses, many of them that are getting large amounts of contracts seem to be geographically based in Ottawa, and nothing wrong with being based in Ottawa, but I mean you would expect for Indigenous procurement that you would hope that kind of businesses that are based in the homeland areas that you've identified would be able to get contracts. Do you have any observations around businesses that are based in your areas getting these contracts versus people needing to move to the south in order to benefit from these opportunities?
If you could offer a brief response, if possible.
I would say that there's a very nuanced answer to that I don't have time for, but there's what we're looking for is legitimacy in these institutions. The geographic location of them may be suited better for the opportunities, but we're just looking for a level playing field.